Hi, and welcome back to the Pinball Mike D Creature Hologram Mod installation video. So in the first installment we talked about removing the hologram and all of its associated hardware. So now in this second video we can start moving forward with the installation process of the new mod. Alright, now it's time to install the mod's game interface harness. So if you lay the wiring out on your floor, at one end of the harness you'll see two connectors. One will be labeled J1, the other will be labeled J2. Those two Molex connectors plug directly into the mod's game interface board. At the other end of the harness, you'll see two more Molex connectors. You'll see one that's labeled J138, and you'll see one that's labeled J134. Those two Molex connectors plug directly into the power driver board in the back box. So first things first, we need to remove the translight, get the lighting panel swung out of the way, and lower the speaker panel. This gives us full access to all of the boards in the back box. So now I need to locate J138 on the power driver board. So if you look in the lower right-hand corner of the power driver board, you'll see a 9-pin IDC connector that's got a single yellow wire on it, and it's plugged into the header pins, or at least it should be, at J138. So we'll remove that IDC connector, disconnecting it from the power driver board. I'll now take the Molex connector on the mod harness labeled J138, and I'll plug it in where that IDC connector was removed. Now you'll notice on J138 that there is a small yellow wire that jumpers over to a Z connector. I will take the IDC connector that was originally on J138 and plug it into the Z connector and tie that back into the power driver board. Now I need to do the same thing for J134. So if you look to the left of J138, you will find a connector labeled J134, and it's sandwiched between a few connectors, so to make it easier to work with, I'm going to disconnect J133, which is the connector right above it, and that gives me better access to J134. So now I'm going to remove the IDC connector on J134, unplugging that from the power driver board. I will now take the Molex connector on the mod harness labeled J134, and I will plug it into the header pins on the power driver board. Now, if you look at J134, the Molex connector, you'll see a small red wire that jumpers off of that connector and goes to a separate set of header pins. That is what I will connect the original IDC connector removed from J134. I'll plug it into those header pins, tying it back into the game. So now all I've got to do is reconnect J133, because obviously the game isn't going to work very well if that's not plugged in. So that takes care of all of the connections in the back box. I can now cleanly route the mod harness wires through the hooks in the back box and drop all of the cabling into the cabinet and move on to the next step of the installation. Alright, so now that I got the mod's game interface harness routed into the rear of the cabinet, we'll find a 2-pin Molex connector on the mod harness. This is what we use to tie the hologram lamp into the interface board. So at this point I'm going to disconnect the hologram lamp from the game harness and plug the game harness into that 2-pin Molex connector on the mod harness. It's important to not forget to do this, because this is the trigger bit that our system uses to display different creature images when various film letters are awarded throughout gameplay. Okay, so with that connection taken care of, I can now cleanly route the rest of the harness wires along the left side of the cabinet as shown here. I want to do this in such a way that the J1 and J2 Molex connectors are roughly right about where the original mirror motor triac board was mounted to the cabinet wall. So in the previous video, I had mentioned that I was going to reused the 4 number 6 screws used to mount the mirror motor triac board to the side of the cabinet wall for the installation of the new interface board. So as you can see, I've removed those screws and installed them in the white standoffs on the interface board. Now before I go screw the interface board into the cabinet, I want to double check and make sure that those screws are in fact not too long, because the last thing I want to do is have a screw push through the exterior of the cabinet wall. And the reason I'm double checking this is because the white standoffs on the interface board are roughly 1/8 of an inch shorter than the original black standoffs used for the triac board. Now, as you can see, if we're using the original factory screws, we're not going to have any issues, and those screws are not going to push through the exterior of the cabinet wall. However, you never know what somebody's done to a game before you get your hands on it, so this is just something to double check, because it's better to be safe than sorry. Alright, so one of the other things I need to do at this point is I need to make a decision regarding which software package I want the mod to run. So as you can see in this picture, there is a small black jumper pin located right next to a block of LEDs on the interface board. That black jumper pin is roughly right below the HDMI port on the Raspberry Pi mounted above the interface board. So if I leave that jumper pin installed, on boot up, the mod knows to run the standard software package, which includes all of the extra video features like move your car, snack bar, left ramp, right ramp, and so on. If I remove that jumper pin, then on boot up, the mod knows to run the hologram emulation software package, which essentially is just emulating the original game design. So I'm a little partial to the standard version because I spent a lot of time editing all those videos, and I'd prefer to see those than just a black screen, which is the reason we made the mod in the first place. So I'm going to leave that jumper pin installed on the interface board, and I'm going to move to the next step of the installation. Alright, so a little helpful advice here. I have found that through experience, it is significantly easier to go ahead and plug in all of the harness connections prior to mounting the interface board to the side of the cabinet. It just makes it a little easier to maneuver. So as you can see, at the bottom of the interface board, we have 2 right angle Molex connectors used to connect the game mod interface harness. These connectors are fantastic for providing a good connection. However, they do take a little finagling to get a proper seat, as shown in this picture here. So care should be taken when landing those 2 connectors, because obviously we don't want to bend any pins, and we certainly don't want to damage the connector on the printed circuit board. Now once those 2 connectors are landed, I want to make sure that I get the IDC connector that was originally on the mirror motor triac board landed as shown here. We use this connector to provide power to the Raspberry, and it also is used to provide the trigger input to our mod so that we know when the machine is in multi-ball. So obviously if that IDC connector is not plugged in, the mod is not going to work correctly. And now I can finally take my 1/4 inch nut driver and go ahead and screw the game interface board into the side of the cabinet where the mirror motor triac board was located. And then last but not least, I need to take the small micro USB cable that is soldered to the game interface board, and I need to take that connector and plug it into the micro USB port on the Raspberry Pi. Obviously, if we don't do that, the Raspberry is not powered up and the mod will not work correctly. Okay, so as everybody knows, pinball machines are built by people and they're hand assembled. So that means, not every pinball machine is identical. And what I'm referring to specifically is the actual location of the mirror motor triac board. Now I have seen some creature machines where that board literally is 1 inch off the bottom of the cabinet floor. And then I've seen other games where that board may have been mounted 6 or 7 inches above the cabinet floor. So how does that impact the installation of our mod? Well, let's take another look at the interface board again. So just to reiterate, we're using right angle style Molex connectors in order to bring all of the mod cabling into the interface board. So what that means is we need 3 to 4 inches of space between the bottom of our interface board and the bottom of the cabinet. And we need that space in order to accommodate all of the mod's cabling and the J2 and J1 Molex connectors that are landed on the interface board. So again, I have seen creatures where the mirror motor triac board was mounted at the bottom of the cabinet, and I've seen machines where it was mounted, easily a half a foot above the floor of the cabinet. So if your machine happens to be one where the triac board was mounted closer to the bottom of the cabinet, you'll probably need to install our interface board higher than where the original triac board was mounted. The easiest thing to do in the event that your triac board was too low is to just use the top 2 holes where your triac board was mounted as the bottom 2 holes for the new mod interface board. And that should shift the interface board up high enough to accommodate the connectors and cabling. And it also provides easy access to the USB ports at the bottom of the Raspberry, and those are what we will use for future software updates. So, with all that said, we have now taken care of the installation of the mod's game interface harness in the back box. We've hooked up all of the game trigger inputs inside the cabinet, and we've got the printed circuit boards mounted. So we are now ready to move to the third and final step of the mod's installation.